In recent months, I have been suffering from an indescribable sense of emptiness. Although my career is flourishing, as a senior manager of the steel company, my salary and social status are quite good. But I feel that there is something missing in my life, as if there is always a gap that has not been filled. The feeling became more pronounced when she returned home, and Madison seemed to have lost her energy and enthusiasm for the life in front of her. Since her last vacation to the Bahamas, she had become quiet and deep in thought. Is she going through a similar midlife crisis? Maybe we should go on another trip and relax. But work is too busy. Last month, due to a big project, I worked overtime to earn a holiday money. On the way home, Madison didn't look as surprised as usual. After all, we've only seen each other a handful of times in weeks. Honey, I've earned a lot of bonus money. Why don't we plan a trip? Just the two of us, anywhere you want to go. I tried to cheer up and smiled at her. Madison gave me a faint look, barely quirking the corners of her mouth. Sounds good, but I'm not in the mood for that right now. Looking at her disheveled look, my mood dropped. This wasn't like the Madison I knew, who used to be so positive and always cheered me up no matter what. Now she was as lifeless as a puddle of stagnant water. Is it because I've been neglecting her too much all this time? Or has she really lost all interest in the life in front of her? No, I had to take immediate action to revitalize the family. I'm determined to plan a trip, even if she can't muster up the energy for a while. I'm going to let her relax. That night, lying in bed tossing and turning, my mind flashed through a variety of tourist attractions. Hawaii, Bali, Seychelles Islands. But for some reason, those who had dreamed of the honeymoon mecca at the moment in my heart cannot stir up big waves. I really feel that we need to change more than just the environment right now. More importantly, I had to get to the root of the problems in the marriage and find a way to get Madison's spirit and energy back into her life. Otherwise, even if I take her to a beautiful place, it will only be a temporary paralyzing experience, and we may come back to a deeper depression. After tossing and turning all night, I woke up the next day determined. I was going to try to find a way to make Madison happy, even if it meant going out of my way. Because if I lose her, I'll have nothing, and the whole world will lose its color in my eyes. In the past few years of marriage, she has been my only ray of sunshine in this cold city. If even this last ray of light is taken away, I will be completely lost. As the sun rose over the curtains, I rolled out of bed and went into the bathroom to wash up. Looking at myself in the mirror, I slapped my cheeks twice and said sincerely to the man in the mirror, "Tristan, you have to get your act together and take back your wife and your happy life." After washing up, I changed into a casual outfit and headed towards Madison's bedroom where she was still sleeping. I gently lifted the corner of her blanket and planted a kiss on her cheek. "Honey, wake up. Let's go for a walk." Although Madison was a little reluctant to take me up on my offer, I decided to take her for a walk to get some fresh air. We drove to a park on the outskirts of the city, where we could get away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Madison didn't say a word the whole way there, and I was trying to start a conversation, but I couldn't get it started. It wasn't until we sat down at a park bench that I broke the silence. "Honey, has something been bothering you these past few months? If something is bothering you, you must tell me." Madison lowered her eyes for a long time before she spoke quietly. "It's nothing. Maybe it's just that I've been a little stressed lately, so I'm a little anxious." I held her hand and said sincerely, "Have I been too busy working and left you out? It's my fault. I swear I will." "No, don't blame yourself." Madison interrupted my next words. "It's not your fault. It's my own." Looking at her bleak eyes, my heart was torn apart, and I suddenly felt a strong sense of powerlessness. My favorite person is in some kind of pain, but I can't exactly feel what it is, and I can't do anything to save her. "Then tell me, what can I do to make you happy again?" I asked anxiously. Instead of answering directly, Madison sighed and asked me, "Have you ever felt that our lives are getting more and more boring? Every day we repeat the same schedule, spend another ordinary night, and have no expectation for tomorrow." Hearing her words, my heart seems to have been severely pulled. Yes, life is indeed a bit monotonous and boring. The original newlywed passion and expectations have long disappeared without a trace. However, we have long accepted this reality. Just as I was thinking about how to answer, a man's figure appeared near us. He was a tall, lean, and powerful man, smartly dressed, carrying a professional ski bag, and walking confidently along the trail. As we saw him approach, Madison and I couldn't help but slow our breathing as we gazed at the vivid, dazzling figure. Seeing this, the man gave us a confident smile and walked straight over to us. "Hi guys, I'm Damian, the ski instructor for the area," he said in a magnetic voice. Madison seemed intrigued by his presence, unconsciously sitting up straight and staring intently at him. Seeing this, I hurriedly interrupted Damian's words. "We are fine, thank you for your concern. But it is also true that lately there is some pressure. I wonder what you have a good remedy." True words? Damian narrowed his eyes as if sizing us up, and after a moment said confidently, "Relaxation and outdoor sports are the best cure for stress. If you want, I can invite you to go to a ski resort in the mountains of Colombia. There, you can enjoy skiing, enjoy the snowy scenery of the Rocky Mountains, get away from the hustle and bustle of the city, and relax." The Colombian Rockies? That's a great place to visit. But this Mr. Damian is a little too enthusiastic. Just as I was about to politely decline, Madison suddenly spoke up and said, "Sounds great. Shall we go, honey?" I froze, not realizing that Madison would be so quick to say yes to this stranger's invitation. But on second thought, such an exciting ski trip might just be the chance to save our marriage. So I hid my misgivings and said to Damian with a smile, "Sure, but I'm afraid your fee is too high. We can't afford to pay a ski instructor's honorarium." "Don't mind that. I'm trying to help you guys get your life back." Damian grinned and waved his hand. "It's kind of a public service for me. You just have to pay for the trip and the lodging." Looking at his glowing smile, I was in a state of panic. Who was this man? Why was he so active and enthusiastic, as if he had other intentions? But then I saw the anticipation in Madison's eyes, and I was swayed. Maybe this was the perfect opportunity to bring us closer together as a couple. Whether or not it was an offer from a stranger, I had to give it a try. So I extended my hand and shook Damian's hand solemnly. "Well, I'll be glad to oblige. Please make sure that you plan well for us, so that we can enjoy ourselves." Damian smiled wider and said firmly, "Don't worry, as long as you guys trust me, I'll definitely give you a memory that will last a lifetime." That night, Madison looked more excited than ever. She double-checked her itinerary and even packed a bag. Seeing her revitalized, I couldn't help but feel grateful that I had made the right choice. But at the same time, my doubts about this Damian were deepening. Ever since Damian showed up that day, Madison has been a different person. Not only had she regained her zest for life, she was even excited about her upcoming ski trip. At the same time, she drifted away from me and seemed to have lost her passion for our marriage. Once, I overheard her looking up information about the Colombian mountains on the internet, so I kindly tried to give her some advice. But she interrupted me stiffly and gave me a stern look. When did my wife become so distant and cold to me? I couldn't help but feel a strong sense of insecurity. Looking at Madison's excitement for the trip, I could almost tell that she was up to something else, and that Damian, the ski instructor, was up to something else. As a grown man, I certainly understand that there can be physical and mental temptations between men and women. Not to mention Madison's lukewarm attitude towards me lately. I wonder if she's already seeing this Damian as a new love interest? An anxiety I had never felt before began to grow in me. I didn't want to watch my marriage fall apart, and I had to find a way to stop it from happening. But what can I do alone? I needed some professional help. So I reached out to Nick, a private investigator who worked for me. "Boss, have you been having some tough family affairs lately?" Nick, being the witty, old-fashioned guy that he is, perspicaciously said when he saw me. I nodded and gave him an honest account of everything that had happened, and Nick listened, deep in thought. "If I say, your wife is definitely by that Damian to compulsion. But this guy's means is not too clever. Actually, can you couple two at the same time play in the palm of your hand? But it does not matter. I will definitely give you to find out." With that, Nick left my office with a wry look on his face. Only a few days later, he came to the door with a stack of information and demanded that a secret investigation be opened against Damian. "Boss, you're going to have to pay me a fortune in gray area investigations, and that's going to be desperate," Nick said to me. Seeing his calm demeanor made me feel much more comfortable, and I put all my trust in Nick, who has always been a reliable and capable professional. As long as I can get to the bottom of that guy, I won't take any chances. I quickly agreed. Over the next few weeks, Nick and his team launched an intense covert operation. I was busy with my work, but I kept an eye on Madison's every move. Finally, a week before we were due to leave, Nick came to the door with a fresh stack of information detailing Damian's background. It turns out that Damian is not a damn ski instructor at all. His real identity is actually a veteran professional fraudster. He used to approach rich women in an ambiguous manner, utilizing their deluded sympathy and curiosity to lure them into favor and trust, and then brutally extracting their finances and spirit. Nick had analyzed dozens of his past scams and concluded that Madison was his next target. Once Madison was easily seduced by him, she would be in for a horrible fate. I couldn't help but feel a chill down my spine, thankful that my frustrated instincts had led me to reveal the true nature of this scumbag in time. I'm going to stop this right now, and show Madison the face of this son of a bitch. Upon learning the truth, I became furious and determined to get rid of the conspiracy myself. Boss, calm down. This is all we have now. This alone is not enough to bring him to justice. Nick pulled me back quickly. I've already started to submit this evidence to the police, so that he can be severely punished by the law. As for you two, you'll have to deal with it personally. But this will have to wait until the critical time. You must be cautious. Nodding my head, I gave Nick a grateful pat on the shoulder. Though the anger inside me was almost consuming me, I had to calm down, plan, and prepare Damian, the son of a bitch, for the lesson of a lifetime. Don't worry, boss. Leave it to us to deal with that scum. He'll definitely pay a heavy price. Nick said as he was leaving. Looking at his faraway back, I secretly resolved that I must carefully calculate and completely destroy this plot to steal the sky and change the sun. In order to save my love, in order to prove to Madison that I love her as much as ever, I can never lose to this treacherous villain. After I was informed of the horrifying truth about Damian's abode, my mind was thrown into a state of confusion. On the one hand, I was glad that I had found out the truth in time. On the other hand, I couldn't help but feel heartbroken and blame myself when I thought that Madison had almost fallen into the trap of that despicable person. As her husband, was I so focused on my career that I neglected her inner world? Did my carelessness open the door for Damian, the rascal? All sorts of self-reflective thoughts were stirring in my mind, and my emotions were in an unprecedented state of confusion. What saddens me most is that Madison didn't show much shock or guilt when she learned Damian's true identity. On the contrary, she seemed to have a problem with what I had done. Why do you have to do this? Can't you trust me? She questioned me when I presented her with the results of the investigation. I was speechless and looked at her helplessly. Had she lost her mind to Damian, the liar? Was she blind to my good intentions? Just as I was begging her to think twice, Nick found me again, uninvited. Boss, the police have already intervened, but the evidence in their hands is still a bit thin. He slapped the document in his hand on the table. If we can't carry out an elaborate plan, I'm afraid that this cunning guy will still be difficult to get away with it. When I heard this, I was inspired and quickly sketched out a bold plan in my head. Nick, we'll do as you say. This time, we have to make a big mess for this Damian, so that he will show his tail, so that the police can make a final decision. I waved my hand to make Nick stand still and instructed with a serious look. In order to make this last-ditch effort, I need your full cooperation. Nick nodded knowingly and waited for me to give the order. First, I want you to send more people to monitor Damian's every move and never let him leave without a door. Secondly, I need you to summarize all the evidence we have as quickly as possible to form a solid accusation. Well, it's all very simple. Nick winked. When I'm done, the third crucial step is that I need you to find a way to set up controls at the airport and request the full cooperation of the airport and the airlines. When the time comes, make sure to stop that Damian and his group and cut off all of their retreats. Nick looked flabbergasted for a moment, then smiled and clapped his hands and said, "What a great trick to win by surprise. Boss is really resourceful. In this way, that asshole will be at the end of his rope and reveal his true colors under our gradual pressure. I patted him on the shoulder and said solemnly, "That's right. This is my final decision. I must completely destroy all the conspiracy before they leave the country. For the sake of our family's happiness, I have no choice." In order to maximize the time available for the operation, we decided to launch the operation 48 hours before Madison and Damian's flight. And Nick immediately started to liaise with the airport, while I went back to the office, assembled the whole team, and gave them a brief explanation. "Gentlemen, I am your boss, and I am your friend and family. This time we will face a major test. Need all of you to contribute money and effort. Although the enemy is ferocious, but as long as we are united and adapt to the situation, we will be able to turn the danger into success." No sooner had I finished my sentence than the office erupted in applause. I was proud to have such a loyal group of men. The operation was set up with Nick's team of detectives keeping an eye on Damian's gang, while I deployed my colleagues at the airport in key locations to intercept, obstruct, and trap them. At the same time, an accusation sheet containing photos, recordings, transcripts, and other solid evidence was produced in full swing and sent to the police as quickly as possible. We waited for the other side to show their hand and then dealt them the final blow. For 48 hours, I waited, almost on my feet, for this critical moment to arrive. I kept eating, but also did not close my eyes for several nights. Every appropriate information from my men, I had to personally check once. I gradually became anxious, irritable, and out of sorts. Finally, when the day of the trip came, everything was in place, and Nick had even set up a meeting room at the airport ahead of time. When I arrived, the lobby looked like it was full of people. "Boss, we've requested the cooperation of all departments on duty. We're just waiting for the gang to show up," Nick whispered beside me. I nodded, taking a sip of my assistant's freshly purchased coffee and steeling myself. Just then, there was a small commotion at the other end of the airport hall. A large group of people were blocking the way at the security checkpoint, roaring. Taking advantage of the situation, I immediately whisked my sleeve and headed that way. I walked over to the crowd with a great deal of vigor. The crowd was packed into one place by a wave of resistance. I squeezed through and finally got a good look at the center of it all. It was Joseph Everett and Madison, under the alias of Damian Wolf. At the sight of them, my anger flared up. I was about to rush forward and punch Joseph, who was disguised as a ski instructor, to the ground. Luckily, Nick was quick to stop me. "Boss, calm down. This is not the time to act rashly," he whispered in my ear. I settled down, looked around, and realized that my men had surrounded them in layers, and the security guards were checking the suitcases they were carrying with puzzled looks on their faces. Through the clamor of the crowd, I could hear Joseph's grinning lips aggressively saying, "What right do you have to detain us? We've already purchased our tickets and are leaving the country legally. You're illegally depriving us of our civil rights." Immediately afterward, Madison shouted at the crowd, "Who are you to do this to us? I want to see your superior officer. Get out of the way, or I'll kill you all." My heart was bleeding as I watched my wife fall under the spell of Joseph Everett, a con artist who goes by the name of Damian Wolf. Madison, how could you have fallen for that kind of sugar-coated bullshit? Do all the years of our precious relationship mean nothing to you? Just as I was getting upset, an airport duty manager was invited over. I winked, and Nick immediately dodged the man aside. I saw them whispering for a few moments, and then Nick pulled a file from his pocket and handed it to the manager. The manager took one look at it, and his face changed. I'm guessing that's the stack of material Nick's gang prepared to reveal Damian Wolf's true identity. It is true that we have been informed by our superiors that we have legal custody of the man who calls himself Damian Wolf. Please cooperate with the on-site inspection for the time being. The manager made a gesture, and several more uniformed security guards stepped out from the crowd and surrounded Joseph and Madison. "What? I'm Damian Wolf, a ski instructor from Arkansas. There must be some mistake." Joseph struggled to get away from the crowd. Seeing that the opportunity was not to be lost, I calmly stepped forward and said to him in a condescending tone, "No, you are not Damian Wolf at all. Your real name is Joseph Everett, and you are a widely known swindler and criminal. We have all the evidence against you, so let's get it over with here today." Joseph sniffed. His face became incredibly ugly, and he glared at me fiercely. "You asshole, what the hell are you talking about?" What are you talking about?" "Huh." I interrupted him and said coldly, "I've investigated all your previous crimes and methods, including how you compelled my wife to commit fraud again." I asked Nick to open the briefcase he was carrying, and inside was a large stack of documents with Joseph's picture on them, as well as the evidence we had collected, such as audio recordings and transcripts. Joseph was struck by lightning and was speechless. "Do you see this? This is the real face of the man you trust who calls himself Mr. Damian Wolf." I yelled to the crowd, including a horrified Madison. "He is a professional liar who has been cheating for many years and has done nothing wrong. This time he was trying to hook up with my wife, again to carry out his lowly fraud plot. Fortunately, we uncovered his true colors in time. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable." The crowd stirred, and many people cast contemptuous and angry gazes at Joseph. Some people even cursed, "You scum! Finally show your tail." At that very moment, airport emergency personnel and police arrived on the scene and surrounded Joseph and the surrounding group. With the solid evidence provided by Nick's group, Joseph was soon listed as an important suspect and was escorted away. Witnessing this scene, I finally let go of my heart and secretly breathed a long sigh of relief. When Joseph was taken away, he gave me a stern look and cursed something under his breath. I didn't care. I just felt that I had made the right choice for my family and for justice. The commotion finally subsided, and the hall gradually regained its usual order. I swept a glance at Madison beside me and found that she was staring blankly at the empty corner with a complicated expression. "Honey, I'm sorry you had to go through all this, but I had no choice but to expose that liar for what he was." I went up to her and touched her shoulder. Madison pushed my hand away violently, her eyes filled with anger and disbelief. "I can't believe you did something so outrageous. Did you have a problem with our trip from the beginning? Did you suspect me all along?" I was slapped in the face by her words and was speechless. How could I explain this so that she would believe that what I had done was out of love and care for her? Damian. No, his real name is Joseph Everett. He's nothing but a selfish, conniving liar. I had to do it to protect you, to protect our marriage. You fell under his spell and almost fell into his trap? Enough. You don't trust me. You yourself admitted that you were skeptical of our plan from the beginning and wanted to thwart it. I can't believe my husband would do this to me." Madison held her head in her hands, tears in her eyes. Seeing her in such pain made me feel even more guilty. But at the same time, I felt that I had done nothing wrong. It was this Joseph Everett, this liar under the alias Damian Wolf, who was really responsible for bringing our marriage to the brink of collapse. Just when I was at a loss, a siren sounded, interrupting our confrontation. A group of police officers came this way, led by a middle-aged man who looked like he should be the duty officer of the airport. "Mr. Tristan, from the clues you provided, we have found out the criminal history of the alias Damian Wolf. He is indeed an international fraud kingpin on the loose, and this time he is targeting your couple to start a new round of criminal conspiracy." The man walked toward us with a solemn expression as he spoke. "Fortunately, you reported the situation to us in advance. Otherwise, I believe that you will not be able to avoid suffering from mental and economic losses. So in this case, you should be worthy of praise." "But," Madison was about to say something, but the man stopped her just in time. "Ma'am, you're too naive and innocent for the time being, and you're easily compelled by crooks to trust them. But it doesn't matter. We have already arrested Joseph Everett, an internationally wanted criminal, and his series of criminal conspiracies have also been smashed by us. You should be thankful that you have a wise man like Mr. Tristan to protect your marriage." I felt a sense of warmth when I heard this stranger say that about me. Yes, everything I do is just to protect my beloved wife and family. Even if she still can't understand it now, I'm sure one day she'll realize what I'm trying to do. With that, the man left and took a group of men to patrol around the airport. Soon, Madison and I were the only ones left. "Honey, I opened my mouth to explain to her again, but she cut me off unceremoniously. "That's it. I don't want to hear any more explanations from you." Madison turned around and left without looking back. I watched her back drift away and let despair engulf me like a tidal wave. It was at this moment that I realized that the rift between us was irreparable. Everything I did to save my marriage was, in the end, futile. Watching Madison's angry back leaving, my heart felt as if it had been emptied, helpless and empty. Originally, I had hoped that through this action, I could completely dismantle Joseph Everett, a fraud in disguise, so as to save her from being jeopardized. But now it seems that not only did I fail to let her feel my pain, but I was treated by her as the victim of all evil. The gap between us seems to be deeper than ever. As I looked around the airport lobby, which was still bustling with people, I felt a mixture of emotions. Joseph, the con man, had been brought to justice, but it didn't seem to have solved the crisis between Madison and I. I had a good feeling that I was going to have a good time. Afraid that I would miss another opportunity, I decided to catch up with Madison and try to hold on to her. But by the time I got to the parking lot, she had already disappeared. As her heart was pounding, her cell phone suddenly vibrated. The caller ID said it was Nick. "Boss, how are you doing?" Nick asked with concern. "Sorry, Nick. Things fell apart." I sniffled hard. Madison got pissed off by our actions, and I don't even know where she is right now. There was silence on the other end. It was a long time before Nick spoke again. "We didn't expect this, but don't beat yourself up, boss. Everything is for your own good. That son of a bitch's plot you have destroyed. As for Madison, as long as you have the opportunity to meet honestly, I believe she will always understand your pain." "Yeah, understand? You are right." I let out a long sigh. What we lack between us is mutual trust and communication. If at the beginning I frankly and openly to her to confide in my concerns, perhaps it will not come to this point today. "So what are you going to do now? Shouldn't you go to her right away?" Nick suggested. "Okay, I'll go find her." I couldn't help but feel a warmth in my heart at the concern in his tone. I hung up the phone and immediately drove to my home with Madison. All the way there, I was trying to figure out how to organize my words so that she would understand what I was trying to say. But when I finally arrived at the door, I was surprised to find that the door was locked. I took out my key, but I couldn't open the door several times. Madison, are you in there? Please, can you open the door? Let's talk." I frantically pounded on the door, yelling and screaming. But there was still dead silence inside, and no one responded to my cries. I was in a cold sweat, and my strength seemed to have been drained. In my despair, Mrs. Ruby from next door poked her head out and looked my way in surprise. "Mr. Tristan, what are you doing? Where's Mrs. Madison? Why isn't she home?" "Mrs. Ruby, I don't know." I sounded a little disheartened. Madison was in such a state of shock today that she's now unaccounted for. "Oh, my God." Mrs. Ruby covered her mouth. "What happened? Do you want me to call the police?" "That won't be necessary for now," I said as calmly as I could, "but if you have any clues, please do let me know." Mrs. Ruby nodded and said sincerely, "If I hear anything about Mrs. Madison, I'll be sure to let you know first. I do hope you'll be able to get back together again. You two seem like such a good couple." I nodded silently and got back into the car. It felt like I was in the dark, and I couldn't see where the road was leading me. Where was I going to find Madison, and how was I going to justify what I had done? After sitting anxiously in the car for an hour, my cell phone rang again. At a closer look, the caller was Madison's number. My heart was suddenly pulled back from the abyss, and I hurriedly answered the phone. "Honey, where are you now? Are you okay?" There was no answer from the other side, only a faint breathing sound. After a while, Madison's familiar voice finally came through. "Tristan, I'm at Kevin's house right now. I just need some alone time to cool off." I was relieved to hear her say that. Although she was still a bit angry, at least she was alive and willing to talk to me. "Okay, honey, I totally understand how you feel at this moment. Just get some rest, and I'll be by your side whenever you need me." I tried my best to say calmly, "But please think twice before you do anything. After all, we are husband and wife, and all issues should be discussed at home." "I know," she replied somewhat reluctantly. "Well then, remember that I've been waiting for you and loving you. I'll wait for you to come back no matter what, until you can understand how I feel. After that, I hung up the phone. Although Madison finally showed up, I still have no idea how we should go on. Maybe this time, I've really broken her heart. But since she gave me a chance, I am determined to hold on to this last spark and wait for it to rekindle. After hanging up the phone, I breathed a long sigh of relief. The weight of my heart finally lifted a little. Although Madison was still holding a grudge against me, as long as she was safe and sound, I had enough time and opportunity to sincerely explain to her and win back her understanding. Looking out the window, the night is getting darker and darker. Before doing so, I must go back to the police station and present the evidence we have seized to the police thoroughly. Only with the power of the law will we be able to bring Joseph Everett, the cunning crook, to justice and put him behind bars for what he deserves. When I arrived at the police station, Nick and his men were already there. When they saw me, they looked at me with concern. "Boss, are you okay?" "I heard that Mrs. Madison." Nick rushed forward and inquired cautiously. "It's okay, Nick. She's safe. She's just hiding for a while to get some air." I laughed bitterly. "Let's just focus on the case at hand and make sure that Everett gets some serious treatment." Nick nodded knowingly and led me into an interrogation room in the police station. There were already several detectives sitting in the room, waiting for us to arrive. Seeing us enter, the detective in charge stood up and nodded at me, tiredly but politely. "Mr. Tristan, we've been briefed by your assistant on the circumstances of this case. However, before we can proceed, we still need you to reconfirm the suspect's guilt." I nodded and told them the whole story. From the time I first realized my wife Madison's abnormality, to the time I hired Nick to conduct a secret investigation, to the time I finally found out the real identity and conspiracy of Joseph Everett, the con man. I told everything I knew, word for word, without omission. On the sidelines, Nick and his men occasionally pulled out recordings and video footage we'd collected to support my story. After hearing my statement, the detective nodded thoughtfully as he picked up the folder in his hand and looked through it. "Well, from the evidence you've provided, it appears that the guy who calls himself Joseph Everett is in fact the international king of fraud, Damian Wolf, who has dozens of prior convictions for fraud and false imprisonment across the country and is an expert at what he does. And this time, he is targeting you and your wife for a new round of criminal activities. It can be said that you exposed his plot in time to avoid further delay and harm." I breathed a sigh of relief at the detective's words. It seemed that Joseph Everett, the crook, had committed his crime with certainty, and for once we had uncovered his scheme. "So how do you plan to deal with this criminal next? Do you need any cooperation from us?" I pursued. "For the time being, you've assisted us in any way you can, so thank you again." The detective said sincerely, "We're going to make sure that Everett guy is punished severely, and he's going to pay for what he's done behind bars. But then again, he is guilty as charged, but you have to be careful." The detective suddenly warned in a low voice, "After all, you're arresting him for personal reasons, and you'll probably get into some unnecessary lawsuits and disputes." I was stunned to hear that. If Joseph Everett's group seizes on this and accuses us of illegally detaining them for acting on our own, we might not be blameless either. That's why it's best for you to hire a good lawyer, just in case they come back to bite you in the ass." The detective advised, then got up and left the interrogation room. After seeing him off, Nick immediately pulled me, muttering in a low voice, "Boss, you have to be careful of that bastard backhanded to bite you." Although we have video recordings of the whole process, but he is, after all, also a good at flirting with the old hand, may give you a hard to weave affront. I nodded. Nick had a point. Joseph Everett was as cunning as a fox. I wouldn't underestimate him. The best thing to do now is to hire a good lawyer as soon as possible to guard against a comeback. "Okay, Nick, I'm going to start looking for a lawyer, just in case I need to make a plan for myself," I said after a few moments of silence. "That's great. Anyway, watch out for that guy. They've got a lot of tricks up their sleeve," Nick urged. By the time we left the station, it was nearly dark. Nick and I walked side by side, our feet a little tired. "Anyway, Nick, what do you think of my decision?" I suddenly asked. "Did I push Madison too far too fast?" Nick shook his head. "Boss, you didn't do anything wrong. It was all about preserving the marriage and love, and your intentions were unimpeachable. But maybe you were a little too forceful and neglected to communicate with Madison." I lapsed into silence, Nick's analysis seemed to make sense. But then again, you can't just stand by and watch the love of your life fall, can you? Nick spoke again. Everything you did was out of instinct and duty to protect her. In the long run, she'll understand. I nodded, but I wasn't so sure. What would be the point of all this if Madison was just far away from me? All my efforts would be nothing more than wishful thinking. Suddenly, my cell phone rang. A quick glance at the number showed that it was a call from a law firm. I answered it without hesitation. Hello, I'm Attorney Salinger, instructed by the police to provide you with legal counseling and services. An unfamiliar male voice came. I was instantly energized. It seemed the detectives had really taken care of everything for us. With a lawyer on our side, we didn't have to worry about Joseph's crooked ass. Well, thank you very much. I said sincerely, I will visit your office soon. It seems that Joseph Everett has nothing to fear this time, even if he fights back. After all, we're well prepared and have the law on our side. The only thing I have to do now is to wait for Madison's forgiveness until she understands and accepts me again. Although with the support of the detectives and lawyers, we finally had the upper hand this time. The pain in my heart was undiminished. The thought that Madison might still be in Kevin's house, alone and displaced, made me feel so sorry for myself and my heart ached. I thought Madison would finally realize what I was trying to do. Instead, she seems to be digging the gap between us deeper and deeper. Was I too hasty in my pursuit of self-righteousness and ignored her feelings? If Joseph was the trigger, did I push hard on the road to divorce? Filled with suspicion and introspection, I couldn't sleep at night. The next morning, I got up and headed to the lawyer's office, hoping to find a clue to Madison's whereabouts. Mr. Tristan, we'd like to welcome you. The lawyer, Salinger, a middle-aged man with a ruddy complexion and good manners, greeted me warmly as I took my seat. Thank you very much for coming to my aid at this critical time. I said sincerely, my biggest problem right now is that my wife is in a very dangerous situation and I can't do anything to save her. I hear you've brought that criminal Mr. Joseph to heel, and now you're worried about his backlash against you? Salinger saw my concern. I nodded my head. Yes, Joseph is such a sophisticated crook that I can't predict what other tricks he's going to pull. That's why I need a legal opinion from your firm to help me assess how much risk we're facing. Yes, you can rest assured of that, Salinger said, taking out a document bag. Here is all the evidence provided by your side, as well as some of Mr. Joseph's previous criminal records. Please allow me to study them carefully, and I will soon be able to give you a professional analysis and advice. Looking at Salinger's serious style, I couldn't help but feel relieved. With such a professional lawyer to rely on, it seems that we will not be too passive. Speaking of your wife, Mrs. Madison, do you have any clues as to where she is currently at Kevin's house? Salinger asked suddenly. I shook my head. Unfortunately, I don't know anything about that for now. Whether or not she's still at Kevin's house is also unknown. But theoretically, she should still be in the city, since there's no sign of her traveling for a while. I thought Madison would come around and take me back after that, but who knew that she was so blind to everything we were doing? Oh, I'd rather have Mr. Joseph stay now than see her go away like this. My voice almost choked as I said this, and Salinger, recognizing my pain, quickly reassured me. Please take care of yourself, Mr. Tristan. Perhaps Mrs. Madison just needs a few days to calm down, and when she does, everything will be easier to discuss. I see. You make a good point. I took a deep breath and pushed my emotions down. So, what's your final word on the case of Joseph, the con man? Salinger studied the document carefully before speaking solemnly. According to this material, although Mr. Joseph has a number of criminal convictions, there are indeed some legal loopholes in our operation. For example, we took him into custody without court authorization, even though we had enough evidence to point to a criminal conspiracy. Legally, this is a violation of the law of private imprisonment, and Joseph may well file a counterclaim against us on this basis. I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread at this. It seems that the detective's advice was not an empty one. But don't worry too much, Mr. Tristan. Salinger sees this and rushes to calm me down. Although Joseph may bite back, as long as we take the proper countermeasures, we won't be hurt by him. As a precaution, I will immediately begin preparing a counter-memorial detailing the legality and justification of our actions. In the meantime, you should be prepared to be subpoenaed and take the initiative." I nodded, a little more settled in my mind. It seems that we have the upper hand now. Even if Joseph argues again, we're still sure enough to put an end to him once and for all. "Well, I will prepare the counterclaim as soon as possible. I hope you read it carefully," Salinger said, got up and led me out of the office. "In addition, please take care of your health. Don't be too hard," Salinger said, got up and led me out of the office. "In addition, please take care of your health. Don't be too hard on yourself, and Mrs. Madison will definitely come to her senses. It just takes time." I nodded heavily, but a vague uneasiness lingered in my heart. If Madison left me like this, then what is the point of this hard work? What I was looking for was a happy, well-off family, but now that family was on the rocks. It was overcast when I left the law firm. I drove around the streets of Pittsburgh, hoping to find a trace of Madison. But no matter where I drove, I had no way of knowing if she was still at Kevin's house or if she had left. Just when I was about to give up hope, my cell phone suddenly vibrated. I looked at the caller ID, and it was Madison. "Dear Madison, where are you now? Are you okay?" I was so excited that I picked up the phone. "Tristan." Her weak voice came on the other end of the line. I'm at the airport. I want to get out of here. Out of this place that broke my heart." "What?" "No, Madison. Please think twice." I was horrified and pounded on the steering wheel. "Where are you going to go after you leave? We have a lot to talk about." "Don't say it again, Tristan," she said with a catch in her voice. "I can't take this anymore, and I can't trust you anymore. Everything between us, I think, has come to an end. I'm sorry I have to leave here and start a new life." There was a loud background noise on the other end of the line, and it seemed that she had already arrived at the airport gate. My brain buzzed and a sense of despair overtook me. Is this how it's going to end? Is this how the years of love between Madison and I are going to end? How can I just let her run away from me and our relationship end like this? "No, please don't do this. Madison, I love you. We've had some problems, but I've never given up on us." My voice was shaking with excitement, and I spoke incoherently. But there was only dead silence on the other end of the line, which seemed to have been hung up. I put my cell phone down in a daze, my eyes a little lost in thought. Reality had slapped me in the face, and the split between us was irreversible. Anger, blame, regret. A complex of emotions came over me like a storm, and I couldn't keep my cool any longer. I stepped on the gas and sped through the streets of Pittsburgh like a blind bull toward the airport. I had to stop her from leaving. I couldn't give up on our marriage, even if it meant destroying our last hope. All I could think about as I drove frantically toward the airport was yelling and begging for Madison. But when I finally arrived at the airport, I was paralyzed by the crowds of people and the huge exit signs. Which gate is Madison at? Has she boarded the plane yet? And even more frighteningly, where exactly is she traveling to? I was at a loss for words. I almost cried. If I let Madison run away like this, wouldn't our years of relationship be in vain? Wouldn't all my hard work be a farce? Just when I was at a loss, a familiar figure flashed beside me. I stared at them, but it was Nick and his men. It seems that they also learned the reason from my mouth, so they followed me here. "Boss, it looks like Mrs. Madison is really leaving." Nick took my arm and said, "We need to find a way to cut her off and talk about what happened this time." I nodded, trying to calm down. It was too late now. I had to do my best to stop Madison in her tracks. Otherwise, it would all be for nothing, and I would never find the courage to live again. Nick flagged over a few young men with strong hands and whispered a few instructions to them. Those people then like lightning quickly into the airport hall and the dense crowd. "From now on, we will completely block the exits of the entire terminal. No one will be able to escape our sight." Nick lowered his voice and said to me, "Boss, just wait here. As soon as Madison appears, we'll cut her off." I nodded gratefully, my heart full of trust in this longtime assistant. As long as they helped me stop Madison, I would find a way to communicate with her and save this dying marriage. The next few minutes seemed like a lifetime. I was fidgeting, and every now and then, I'd be drawn to some woman in a long dress. But each time, I was disappointed that they weren't Madison. Just when I was about to give up hope, there was a sudden commotion at the exit. The crowd was in an uproar, and a familiar figure loomed in the crowd. Upon closer inspection, it was Madison. She was alone, dragging a large suitcase and struggling towards the exit. I almost cried tears of joy that she had finally appeared. That's the woman. Cut her off. I winked at Nick. He understood and immediately passed the order to his men. Soon, a few athletic young men pushed their way through the crowd and surrounded Madison. She looked around in amazement and seemed a little alarmed. I took a few steps in front of her and grabbed her arm with both hands. Madison, where are you going with this? Are you just going to run away? I questioned. My voice choked with emotion. Madison looked shocked and was about to say something. I cut her off. No, you stop it and listen to me. I know that a lot of things have gone wrong between us these days, but you have to believe that my love for you has never changed. Just let's talk about it, and don't leave me in our home like this, okay? Madison was speechless, just staring at me with wide-open eyes. I could feel the tears in those eyes, filled with pain and disbelief. Darling, please believe me. I had to do what I did to protect our relationship. I just don't want to see you fall, and I don't want our marriage to fall apart. But why can't you trust me? Why do you keep doubting me, doubting our relationship? Madison finally spoke, tears welling up in her eyes. Looking at her like this, my heart aches even more. Obviously, everything I did was for her own good. But why can't she see my hard work? Just at this time, a middle-aged man pushed through the crowd and walked in front of us. I fixed my eyes on the staff member who had spoken to me at the airport earlier. Mr. Tristan, I said I understood all the efforts you made to save your marriage. The man said solemnly, Mrs. Madison, look at your husband. He loves you so much. Don't let the temptations of outsiders compel you to appreciate what you have in front of you. Madison looked at me as if she had been touched by the man's words. I understood and continued. Honey, yes. Maybe I'm being a little arbitrary, but it's just that I love you so much that I'm afraid of losing you. I just wanted to protect our marriage, and I didn't want you to get hurt. But what I did was wrong. I neglected to communicate with you properly, which caused such a serious gap and rift between us. But no matter what, I still love you, as I always have. Please, don't leave me like this, okay? Let's go home and start a new life, okay? I unconsciously kneeled down and grasped her hand with both hands. The crowd around us was silent. All eyes were focused on us. Madison was so moved by my sincerity that she burst into tears. She lowered her head and couldn't stop crying. After a long time, she looked up and gazed at me with complex emotions in her eyes. Tristan, I'm just so sad. Her voice choked. Is this the end of the road for us? I don't know if I should trust you anymore. Forgive me. I'm so tired. With those words, she staggered out of my grasp. I froze in my tracks, letting her walk away from me and drift away. At some point, Nick had run up to me and helped me to my feet. Boss, it's over. We failed. He whispered, It looks like Mrs. Madison is determined to leave you. I was speechless and watched Madison walk out of the airport. The crowds around us dispersed, and the hustle and bustle of the airport gradually returned. But for me, it's all gone out the window. Had the relationship between Madison and I really come to an end? Is there a rift between us that can't be healed? Just then, my cell phone rang again. When I answered it, my voice was a little hoarse. It was Attorney Salinger. Mr. Tristan, we have enough evidence to prove that everything you did was for the sake of preserving your marriage and love, not for any other illegal purposes. He said solemnly, although the fact of your separation has been finalized, we will still do our best to defend your legal rights and interests at the legal level. I let out a long breath at Salinger's words. Yes, no matter what happens in the end, this will be a lawsuit. What I was looking for was just a quiet and stable family. But now the family has ceased to exist. After seeing Madison's back disappear, my heart felt as if it had been emptied. Is this relationship between us going to end like this? Is there really nothing left between us? Looking at the airport hall back to the hustle and bustle of the crowd, my eyes unconsciously wet. These unfamiliar people are starting their own life journey in an organized manner, while I am here looking at my own life at a loss. Nick patted my shoulder and helped me up with great effort. Boss, I'll walk you home. You're in no condition to be driving alone. I nodded and let him take me out of the airport. The whole way there, my eyes were a little blank. I had envisioned Madison and I going home hand in hand a million times, but now I'm the only one left here. When we returned home, we were greeted by familiar furnishings and decor, but the warmth of Madison was nowhere to be seen. Every item, every corner, seemed to tell the story of our old sweet time and the tragic end. I sat on the sofa and was depressed for a whole day and night. Nick saw how disheveled I looked and stayed with me, urging me to take good care of myself. But I was just like a zombie, living in a daze. When I woke up the next morning, Nick was no longer at home, but there were ingredients in the refrigerator that he had bought. I picked up the food in the microwave, but I couldn't eat it. What used to be my home had become so cold and unfamiliar. I turned on the TV, but I couldn't see anything. All I could see was Madison's shadow, her gentle face, her beautiful laughter, and her last pair of eyes full of pain and betrayal. One scene after another lingered in front of my eyes. I slammed down the remote control and finally burst into tears. When did life start going down this path of no return? Did I do something that killed the last hope between us? It was 2 weeks later when Nick came to visit me a few times, but every time he saw my disheveled appearance, he just shook his head and advised me to get back on my feet. "Boss, what you're doing now doesn't make any sense to Mrs. Madison," he said helplessly. "Your problems still need to be solved through legal channels. The good thing is that we have already made sufficient preparations. As long as the time comes, we will be able to bring that Joseph to justice. But I don't just want to punish him, I want to save our relationship," I muttered in a self-destructive whisper. Nick could do nothing but patiently reassure me and bring me a copy of Salinger's latest brief. "Tristan, you've got to see this." Nick handed me the file. "If you take a good look at the contents, you'll realize how honorable and reasonable everything we're doing is, and don't let that con man Joseph make a fool out of you." I nodded and looked through the pile of information. As expected, Salinger had detailed the justification and rationale for our actions, and had made Joseph's crimes sound like a good one. Seeing that, it's like I've gained some new strength. Yes, no matter what Madison thinks of me, I've always taken those actions to protect our marriage. Even if she can't understand it now, one day the truth will come out. "Well, thank you, Nick, and thank you, Salinger." I breathed a long sigh of relief. If we continue to be so persistent, I believe that one day we will be able to make Madison understand my pain. But until then, I'm going to have to fight for myself and clear my name of that liar's slander and libel. Nick patted his chest and assured, "Don't worry, boss, with Salinger and I here, Joseph, that crook will never be able to get away with it. Wait and see. We will definitely bring him to justice and let you stand in the courtroom again with honor." Nick's warm words gave me some comfort. He left soon afterward, leaving me alone. I opened the Salinger file again and studied every detail of it. What is written in the document is not just cold legal reasoning, but a relationship that has been going on for several years. Every link, every argument, every bit of my memory is told. Reading the words over and over again, my feelings changed from pain to anger to indignation. I loved Madison so much, and I had worked so hard to preserve our marriage. But that Joseph played us both in the palm of his hand, and in the end, he slandered my intentions and trampled my sincerity underfoot. So he deserved to die. It was at this moment that I made up my mind to bring this liar to the ground on a legal level, so that the whole world would see his true colors. This is not only to save Madison, but also to protect my own dignity and honor. So I immediately dialed Salinger's number and asked him to come to my home for a meeting that night. I wanted to strategize on how to bring down Joseph, the scoundrel, in the courtroom. "Tristan, it's good that you're finally thinking about it," Salinger said approvingly. "We're going to do the same and make sure we don't let that crook Joseph make any money out of this case." Hanging up the phone, I let out a long, hot breath. Yeah, I may have been a little weak all along, but starting today, I have to get my act together, for myself and for Madison. This family, even if it's nearly broken now, I must restore its dignity. Even if Madison did abandon me in the end, I couldn't allow her to put my heart at risk. I settled down, went into my study, and got to work. Madison had left me, but our relationship wasn't over. Let this last lawsuit wash over us and see where the truth leads us. Whatever the outcome, I will defend my honor to the death. Let's see who wins this final battle. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, please feel free to contact me. Take care.